Great. Well, thanks, Jill. That's a glowing reference. I hope I can live up to it. Well, welcome to Lenstec's first worldwide webinar, which we've entitled A Clear View of Asymmetric Multifocal IOLs. I know you may feel that we're a little late to the webinar party. However, as a company and from our most recent clinical feedback, we now feel in a really strong position to be able to provide you with an educational platform on this subject. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Jim Woodward, and I've been Sales Director of Lenstec UK for the last 24 years. So the webinar, you may ask, why now? The lens has been available for 10 years after all. Really, it's nothing more complicated than over the years, the lens, the procedure, and the delivery method have now evolved through a number of events that have got us to this point. And starting with that, it takes us back to 2012 when we first launched the ClearView 3. It was a very soft launch through a number of surgeons that also had an input into the lens design initially. Having seen the good, the bad, and the ugly of the other premium lenses, their combined input was absolutely invaluable. After a period of positive results in 2015, Lenstec opted to submit the lens for FDA approval. For those of you who've been involved in an FDA trial, you'll understand what a massive time and resource draining project this is. 2016 saw the launch of the ClearView 2, which was introduced pretty much in the same way as the 3. And in 2018 was a big moment for us as we received the Chinese FDA approval for the ClearView 3. By using our ever-increasing knowledge and working alongside an experienced distributor, sales of this lens in China absolutely went through the roof, selling tens of thousands of these lenses a year. Tragically, in 2020, COVID-19 hit the world, putting a halt to all but essential activities. Not to be beaten by the virus, the world started to communicate and live life over platforms such as Zoom and Teams, which allows us to do things like this today. And then finally, in the summer of 2022, we received the FDA approval to start selling the lenses in the United States. So obviously we're here today, not just to hear about Lenstec this and Lenstec that. It is an educational forum, and this has kind of brought us up to date to where we are now. The combination of all these events has really helped Lenstec, and more importantly, the surgeons, to achieve a greater understanding of the procedure, while at the same time maximising patient outcomes. We now really want to pass this on to help you gain more insight of how it all works. The 3 lectures today will discuss different parts of using asymmetric IOLs. Dr. Donju will discuss patient selection for asymmetric lenses and how this and also how it's evolved over the years. Professor Venter will break down and explain the ClearView 2 peer review data, including the importance of patient satisfaction. And last but not least, Dr. Kim will educate us on how to introduce a new lens into an established practice from a standing start and how to overcome the inevitable teething problems. Okay, just for a couple of minutes now, for those of you who aren't familiar with us, I'd like to introduce you to Lenstec as a company. Because some people might say, Lenstec, who are you? Well, Lenstec's actually been established since 1993. Initially, we were a technology transfer company, which basically meant that we built the labs that made the lenses, of which we built 8 laboratories worldwide. One of those was the Star manufacturing facility in Switzerland. Another one is, I don't know if you're aware of the Aravind Eye Hospital in Madurai in India. They do well over 400,000 cataracts per year, which is almost as much as the whole of the UK in 1 year. Obviously, lenses were a big part of their expenses. They contacted Lenstec, who built a lab within the hospital, and they now manufacture their own lenses on Lenstec technology. In fact, more IOLs are made worldwide using Lenstec technology than any other system. The problem is it was a very niche market. There's only so many lens companies out there. You can't build labs forever because you end up building yourself out of business. So what we did was basically the next natural step was to go into manufacturing lenses. We knew a lot of experts around the world from our travels building the labs, so we put together a team that would allow us to open up a factory. We just needed a place for the factory now. That ended up being in Barbados. I don't know if you're aware, but back then the Barbados government had a big problem in the fact that they have one of the best education systems in the world. Again, I don't know if you're aware, but they have one of the highest literacy rates per capita of 99.6% of kids over 15 years old. They educate them free of charge through university. Unfortunately, there wasn't the diversity of industry on the island to test these kids with the degrees and allow them to make a living in what they wanted to do. So they ended up moving to the UK, Europe, North America, wherever they could ply the trade. Barbados decided to address this by inviting companies such as Lenstec and other companies to bring more diversity of industry to Barbados, and so help take advantage of their own education system. We now have 2 manufacturing facilities, obviously Barbados, as we discussed, and we also at our corporate headquarters in Florida. Both of these are FDA monitored and approved. So since we started manufacturing in 1995, lenses that is, we've taken on a number of projects. We've done a load of private label lenses. This basically means that you make a lens to a company specification and you put the lens in their box. And companies we've worked for include Bausch & Lomb, Santen in Japan, and Star. From that, we've sold over 12 million lenses worldwide in that time. In 1999, we opened up the UK office as the company's first direct sales operation, and we received our first FDA approval for the Softtech HD in 2010. And this culminated with the ClearView 3 multifocal being approved in August 2022. So that's enough about Lenstec. You're here to be educated today. And I want to introduce you to our first lecturer. And this is provided by Dr. Jean-Pierre Donjou, who specialises in corneal diseases and cataract and refractive surgery for both corneal and intraocular procedures. He's worked for the National Health Service at Sunderland Eye Infirmary for over 25 years, during which time he's been an examiner for the Royal College of Ophthalmology, also being part of the team that set up refractive laser surgery assessment for the Royal College. Dr. Donjou expanded his area of expertise into the private sector, where he opened the Sight for Eyes Clinic in the year 2000. The clinic specialises in excimer laser, cataract and refractive surgery, and therapeutic procedures. As the practice became established, Dr. Donjou became one of the premium providers of private ophthalmic surgery in the northeast of England. Some of his posts to date include Clinical Director of Sunderland Eye Infirmary, Senior Examiner for Laser and Refractive Surgery for the Royal College of Ophthalmology. He's a founding member of the British Society of Refractive Surgeons. He's been Clinical Director of Ultralaser Laser Clinic and also the sole owner of Sight for Eyes Private Clinic. Dr. Donjou, in his private life, is married with 5 children. In what little spare time this allows, he attends and helps out with his kids' sporting events. He's also a huge fan of Newcastle United Football Club and regularly indoctrinates his 2 youngest boys by taking them to games whenever possible. Also, he's particularly watchful of how the game is refereed, being a level 7 referee himself. In fact, having attended a couple of games with him, I've noticed that he's quite prone to shouting at the referees, usually offering them free lenses, but not quite as politely. Dr. Donjou is also a keen sports car enthusiast and a very, very frustrated golfer. Premium multifocal lenses have changed and improved dramatically over the last 10 years. With this, the correct criteria for patient selection is also involved. Dr. Donjou's lecture will hopefully highlight the evolution of patient selection, especially with regards to asymmetric lens designs. He has a lot of experience in this field, having used different makes of asymmetric lenses, as well as concentric ring multifocals on top. Hopefully you'll gain some insight and pick up a few tips on the way with regards to patient selection, as a lot of this will also be pertinent to all multifocal designs as well. ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Jean-Pierre Donjou.
Thank you, Jim. Thanks, Jill. Thank you to Lenstec for asking me to present today. I am going to share my screen, I hope, with you. Let's go here. There we go. Right. Okay, I'm good there. Now, can everybody see the presentation there okay? Good. All right. So yes, today my remit was to share with you some information on the ClearView 3 lens, and also to discuss some of the aspects of patient selection and suitability for surgery. So there are my financial disclosures. I'd like to say thank you to Millen Pandey and Hunter Newsom for some of the images that I've incorporated into some of my slides. So we know that there are 15% of patients certainly in the UK, in our population, who have a degree of ametropia that's greater than about 2 diopters, either myopia or hyperopia. And 2/3 of patients, so why am I going forward so quickly? I don't want to be going forward, I'm going backwards. It doesn't, right, sorry, excuse me a moment here, because it's just wanting to advance without me. There we go. So yeah, so 2/3 of patients have low to moderate levels of hypermetropia. And also what we know, of course, is that everybody is going to become presbyopic. So that means at some point, most people are going to need some form of optical correction. Glasses, people often don't like using glasses, particularly hyperopes. You know, when they've been young, they've never needed to wear glasses for anything at all. And they get into their 50s and suddenly they find that they're wearing glasses all the time for everything. So certainly there's a motivation for having surgery. The threshold for lens removal has changed with advances in technology, and we no longer have to wait for a lens to become opaque like a burnt piece of toast before we'll consider removing it. And nowadays we're quite happy just to have a very lightly singed piece of bread with a presbyopic eye, where we'll take the lens out and put a new lens in. You know, of course, that Harold Ridley implanted the first implant back in 1950, and since then lens technology has evolved tremendously, and that puts in a nice position of having a huge selection of presbyopia correcting implant options. And today, of course, what I'm going to share with you is some of the views on multifocals. Oops, sorry, I'll go back. The first multifocal was implanted by John Pierce back in 1986. And thinking about how those lenses worked, they were concentric ring designs, either diffractive or refractive. The principle, however, is generally fairly straightforward and similar for all of them. Monofocal lenses, of course, we know give a single far focus point, whereas a multifocal works by providing simultaneously 2 axially separated focal points to the retina, and we then rely on the retinal and cortical processing systems so that we use the focused light on the retina for our image, the thing that we're looking at, and the out of focus light we then have to ignore. I'm not going to spend too much time talking about the different types of lenses. There are different configurations, either diffractive or refractive, but the principle is the same. They're both going to split light and then present those 2 images. But we certainly had some problems, particularly in the early days. That splitting of light creates issues. We've got to split the light between the far focus and the near focus. Diffractive implants, we see about 41% of light split between the 2. But it also means that there's in that light transition, there's an 18% light loss. And that in itself can create problems. We need to try and reduce wastage. The issues with light loss are that there's a reduction in contrast sensitivity. We also saw patients who complained of waxy vision. And of course, dysphotopsias commonly were reported, and I'm sure you're all well aware of that: glare, halos, starbursting, etc. Of course, with a 2-point focus, implant, then we tend to have poor intermediate vision because the lens is working primarily for distance and near. So there were certainly some issues with early multifocal designs. On top of that, 20, 30 years ago, we didn't have the diagnostic equipment that we do have nowadays to screen eyes. I think that our knowledge and understanding of corneal optics is not where it is today. And also our ability to perform biometry and the formulae, the early generation formulae that were used were not perfect. And all that led to issues with patient selection. And obviously then we saw some of the problems with visual results, outcomes, and dissatisfaction. So of course, we've had evolving technology since then, and we've seen evolving machinery, both to perform lens surgery and also on the diagnostic side, but also in lens technology as well. We've seen combined hybrid type lenses, trifocal lenses such as panoptics, and then the lens we're looking at mainly today, which is rotationally asymmetric implants. And with a rotationally asymmetric lens, we've got the lens split essentially into two components, one for the far vision and one for the near. But the goal of any multifocal lens is to make the patients less dependent on their glasses for all distances. Having said that, no lens can provide seamless, perfect vision at all distances and all levels of illumination, and we're yet to see that lens it be there. The ClearView 3 was first implanted in Europe just 11 years ago, and then, as Jim says, it got FDA approval in the US last year. It's a biospheric zero ablation design, 4-point fixation, modified plate optics, which have a zero angulation, and there's a 3 diopter near ad zone, which you can see there on the inferior part of the lens here, and that gives us an extended depth of focus. It's manufactured to a high tolerance of 0.11 diopters, which is well in excess of the industry standard, and it allows Lenstec to produce lenses with 0.25 diopter increments, and that high tighter tolerance also helps to avoid single diopter overlapping of implants. So the optical principle of how the lens works is there's a base lens power, the IOL labeled power, which gives us our distance vision, and then that 3 diopter above base for near vision. But it's the same principle as the other multifocals in that we're splitting light and creating 2 axially separated focal points, and then we've got to choose which image we're going to use for vision. There is no intermediate zone of power, unlike the Alcon trifocal panoptics, and we get intermediate vision by an overlapping zone of remnant power from the other 2 zones, and also additional depth of field, which comes from residual postoperative spherical aberration. The clinical data that's been accumulated to date shows that this does work and that the lens provides good intermediate visual acuity, as well as good far and good near vision. So what does the lens offer? Well, there's no concentric rings. We have a significant reduction in light transition and light loss, if you like, down to 8% compared to competitors in the concentric ring lenses, which have 12 to 18%. The split is a little bit more for distance than for near, but with loss of light, we get with reduced loss of light, we get improved contrast sensitivity. There's less duplication of images, which reduces glare and halo, and therefore gives us a better image quality. And as I say, we get a good full range of vision. It's the only premium implant available in quarter diopter steps, and we already said that these are tighter than industry standard. And therefore, we can be fairly confident when we choose our lens that we can select powers that are as close to labeled as possible, and as close to what the patient needs. So how do we achieve success with a ClearView 3 multifocal? Well, really, it relies on careful patient selection. It relies on making sure that the patients know what to expect from their surgery. And it also relies on us achieving the results that we want. We need to take time to explain to the patients what they're going to achieve and also how quickly we can expect them to achieve that. Patients don't like surprises, and we have to be able to predict what's going to happen for them. We have to let them know that there is no absolute guarantee that they're going to achieve 20/20 unaided vision, and no multifocal lens will guarantee that. But the ClearView 3 will certainly make them less dependent on glasses following surgery at all distances, and that we'll find that 90% of patients are satisfied with over 90% of patients are satisfied with their vision after surgery. We need to inform them that they may still get some glare and halo around lights at night, particularly, but that most people will adapt within a short period of time, and that they should have adequate light when reading and using near vision. But the aim is that all patients are happy with their spectacle-free vision at all distances, and that they can complete all their visual tasks with minimal or no dysphotopsias. We need to modulate their expectations. We need to really be realistic in what they're going to achieve, never guarantee outcomes. And we also need to be frank and honest in our discussion with them regarding any potential risks, such as PCR and possibly even the need for lens exchange, or not being able to put a multifocal lens in if they have a surgical complication at the time of surgery. So we have to develop a partnership with our patients. So moving on from that, and talking more specifically about who we're going to choose to put lenses in, I certainly suggest, and a lot of this is the same for any multifocal lens. We want to avoid patients with unrealistic expectations, certain personality types where they're highly critical, obsessive, anxious, and not necessarily good patients for refractive lens surgery with multifocals. We need to exercise caution when we consider certain groups of patients, and occupational night drivers, certainly in the early, when you start using this lens, it's the same as using any other multifocal lens. You need to exercise caution there. But having said that, we do find that the issues with nighttime vision I've found have not been as bad as with other concentric ring lenses. And so I'm fairly comfortable of putting these into a lot of patients who have night vision requirements, as a lot of the other surgeons do as well, I'm sure. Patients who only wear glasses for reading and close work, again, they can sometimes engender dissatisfaction with multifocals. And even if they get an emmetropic outcome, just the altered optics, the multifocal optics, can give them an altered perception of their distance vision. So even though they might still measure 20/20 or better, they're still having to deal with that split optic system. And sometimes that's not as good for them as it was without glasses before. And of course, if they are left with any residual ametropia, that also is going to mean that their unaided distance vision is not as good. So you've got to be careful with presbyopic emmetropes. And again, not the sort of people I would suggest that you use when you're starting out with multifocals or with ClearView. But once you get that experience and that knowledge, then you potentially can move into that group. And the same is the case for myopes, low myopes, particularly because they often have really good unaided near vision. And again, the same as the emmetropes for their distance, the myopes may find that their unaided near vision is just not quite as good as it was, and they can be quite introverted and intense about their near vision and it not being so good. So you just need to be wary about that. Previous laser refractive surgery, we know about the issues of implant power calculations. We know about the issues that exist with corneal aberrations, which I'll come to again later. So you just, again, need to be cautious with those, particularly patients treated a long time ago with the early types of laser. Other pre-existing pathology, I've included glaucoma here. A patient who's got stable glaucoma with no visual field defect and you're not having any major concerns, I think that's quite reasonable to put these lenses in. But I think if you've got unstable glaucoma or a significant field loss, then personally, I would be avoiding multifocals in those sort of individuals. Now, one of the issues specifically with the ClearView 3 or any rotationally asymmetric implant comes down to pupil size. And you've got to, again, be wary of small pupils or eccentric pupils. So to begin with, you want patients who have a photopic pupil that's bigger than 3 millimeters. And that just comes down to, if you have a slight displacement of the lens, then in a small pupil, there is a risk that you're not going to get the full benefit. You may only get either the distance or the near portion of the lens exposed to the main line of sight visual axis, and that can create some issues. Once you've got experience with the lenses, I think we're quite happy to go down to about 2.75, 2.8 in the right patients. But to begin with, use more than 3. Amblyopia, again, it's lower levels of amblyopia I don't have too much trouble with, but it's any significant amblyopia, I wouldn't be putting any type of multifocal lens in those sort of patients. Cornea, I'll come back to in a moment, and of course any other surgical comorbidity, other comorbidity that can increase surgical risk, we need to be wary of. So your ideal starting patient when you're coming out and you're going into these sort of lenses is you really want a low presbyopic, hyperope, with not much corneal astigmatism. That's your ideal patient. Preoperatively, regardless of what they are, we want to look at for any pre-existing ocular pathology, and especially if this poses any risk to their vision and visual outcome. So anterior segment, the usual things that you should consider, as with any type of premium lens surgery, any lid margin disease, ocular surface disease, tear film deficiency, dry eyes. And we have mechanisms to assess these and monitor them. Tear osmolality we can test, tear breakup time, things like that, vital dye staining. You're all familiar with that, and those are things that we should be doing routinely with any of these premium lens patients. The cornea, we of course need to look for any signs of corneal disease and any opacities, any corneal irregularities, dystrophies that are going to potentially impact on our outcome. And epithelial basement membrane dystrophy in particular, they can have good vision, but you don't know what's going to happen with that. And as the epithelium changes over time, then they can find they get more astigmatism, more irregularity, and that's potentially going to impact on a multifocal. Any opacities that cause light scatter is potentially going to be detrimental when you've got lenses that are splitting light to begin with. Corneal astigmatism, I think, again, this is with the ClearView 3, there's no toric option for this lens. So we do have to be mindful of corneal astigmatism. And certainly to begin with, you don't want to be operating on anybody with more than 1.25 diopters of corneal astigmatism. I think you also got to look at what the orientation is, comparing that with where you're going to place your incision. You know, if you've got 1.5 diopters and it's on your axis of incision, then you may be comfortable carrying on with that. But if it's perpendicular to that, then that can be an issue for you. So just be aware of corneal astigmatism, and in particular, I always like to measure the total corneal astigmatism, because the back of the cornea sometimes can hide a surprise. And here's a case here. We can see that this patient's got 0.9 diopters of astigmatism on the corneal maps. But if we actually go into the pentacam in a bit more depth and look at the total refractive power, we can see that in the central zone, that astigmatism, it goes up to 1.4 diopters. So that we've just got to be careful of, and sometimes it can be more than that. In this case, it's not so bad because it potentially is on an on-axis area, so we're probably going to reduce that anyhow. But that's something that you should look at. Now, I'm a firm believer that corneal optics are pivotal to success when it comes to premium lens surgery with multifocals. You can have the best lens going, but if you've got an aberrated cornea or an irregular cornea, it's just going to undo all the good work that lens is put in for. So it's vital that you make sure that the corneal optics are up to the job that you want from them. Unfortunately, we have the kit nowadays that we can do that. So tomography machines, the Pentacam, the Sirius, they can all provide us with higher order wavefront aberrometry, and it is so vital that we look at that preoperatively. And on top of that, don't rely just on one single scan. You need to make sure it's reproducible. So, at least two. Ideally, they should be time separated. That's obviously not always convenient, but you need to know that what you're measuring is reproducible. And sometimes you have to think about using a bit of adjunctive lubrication just before you do that scan, just to make sure that there's no tear film issues or ocular surface issues that potentially sort of blur muddy the waters. Okay. So we know that the average corneal higher order aberrations are about 0.38 microns. The higher order aberrations that I'm particularly wary and look at are spherical, coma, and trefoil. And I think beyond that, once you get into the fifth level and higher, it's not quite so they don't have quite the same impact. But I think you've got to be careful if the total aberrations are more than about 5 microns, if there's any significant deviation of spherical, or if there's significant coma or vertical. I'll just share with you here, this is a patient who has a nice corneal map, nothing particularly exciting there, 0.4 diopter space astigmatism on there. We look at the corneal power distribution, and again, if we look at the total corneal power, it's nice, there's no significant astigmatism. And if we look at their normalized zernicadalia, and this is, we probably use a small percentage of the capability of the pentacam when we're assessing patients. And these things you can delve into. You can get all sorts of information from it, which is useful. And if we look at their normalized Zernica data, which just means going into display, picking Zernica data, clicking normalized on the tab there, and you can hear the normalized data. And we look at that, it's all there's no significant outliers there. There's nothing that sort of immediately rings a bell or anything like that. And if we look at their pyramid of their Zernica aberrations, we can see that the total RMS is less than 0.5, and the spherical 0.261 there that's ringed is pretty much average, and the coma and trefoil are all pretty normal. You're never going to get a perfect corneal map there. There's always some degree of irregularity one way or another. It's just knowing that it's within the bounds of tolerability. Here's another patient where it's different. We can see here, if we look at trefoil, it's well out, and the coma, the vertical coma is I'll go back to that. The vertical coma that we can see here is well out. The trefoil is well out. And when we look at the pyramid, we can see here that's the vertical 0.6 and 0.2 for trefoil. And we can see the higher order aberrations here are well above 0.5. And this is a patient with This is a patient with keratoconus, so not a good candidate for a multifocal lens. You've got the Berlin-Ambrosio enhanced ectasia display with pentacam. You've got similar ectasia diagnostic software with other machines, and it's worthwhile just taking a moment to look at those as a screening tool. Cord mu, I'm not going to. Don't want to spend an awful lot of time on cord mu. It's sort of it's similar to angle kappa, except that it's a two-dimensional displacement rather than just an angle that we're measuring, and it's supposed to be a bit better than angle kappa. But it's a talk in itself to go through the issues of cord mu, how you measure it, and the implications of it. But just to know that that there is a displacement there. The issues with it are that there are people who say that there are publications that say that if you've got cord values of more than 0.6 or of apparent or 0.42 actual, that you're going to get a higher incidence of glare and halos with diffractive multifocal implants. Okay. And then yet again, there are other talks that will say, other presentations that will say that, that there's no significant difference with preoperative angle kappa, cord mu, in other words, with, for example, the trifocal panoptics. There are a lot of variables here that come into play, as well as it's going to change with pupillary dilatation. We know it does with pharmacological pupillary dilatation, but it may well do just under physiological circumstances as well. So there is no published data, as far as I'm aware, that links the rotationally asymmetric outcomes with ClearView preoperative readings. I've never been massively worried about it. I think I'll look at all the other things first, take those into account. But there are a lot of variables, a lot of controversy over what the true implication of ClearView or angle kappa is in terms of selection for multifocals and outcomes. So, as I say, that's a talk in itself, but you just need to be wary of it. And then finally, looking at the posterior segment, the vitreous needs to be clear. Again, we've got diagnostic tools for looking at the retina, OCT scanning. Patients with AMD, epiretinal membranes, they can have good visual acuity, but if they've got signs of that disease, it's not going to get better. It will only go one way. It will only get worse. And that's something you've got to bear in mind. And that's a discussion, at the very least, a discussion you have to have with the patients, warning them. Anything significant, I tend to shy away from the lenses. You've got an added complication if the patient's got a lens opacity as well, and the vision's reduced, because you don't necessarily know how much vision reduction is due to the lens opacity and how much is due to the retinal problem. So that makes life even more tricky. And again, for me, in those circumstances, I tend just to stick with a standard monofocal lens. I'm risk averse in that situation. Stable diabetic retinopathy, not involving the macula. Good diabetic control. Again, it comes down to a discussion with the patients about risk that's involved. And again, optic nerve, any optic nerve disease that potentially is going to affect processing image, sending that retinal image. Again, you've got to be wary of using multifocals with those sort of patients. Vital that we get good IOL power calculation. We've got great machines now that do that for us. Remember, you've got to be wary of long and short eyes, that we need to choose the appropriate formula for these sort of patients. There's not always a straightforward correct answer for it, but I think what you need to do is you have to audit your results, and then you've got to adjust your personal biometry constants to make sure that matches your outcomes. But at the end of the day, it's all down to technical perfection, accurate biometry, you doing great surgery. Think about maybe using a CTR, not a bad idea, to put a capsule tension ring in, stabilize that bag, keep it central, which helps to maintain the implant position. And also, of course, with the ClearView 3, we do have to be wary of making sure we've got good astigmatism control with our surgery as well. And at the end of the day, we want to just routinely exceed patient expectations. So we've got, with the ClearView 3, we've got improving IOL technology. We've got an excellent range of focus across all distances. We've got reduced light loss and better images. We've got less dysphotopsia. And all of this leads to better results and better patient acceptance. So, keys to success here: careful patient selection and screening, thorough counseling, meticulous surgery. That'll see you in good stead. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, JP. That's fantastic. We've had a few questions in. Actually, most of them is the age-old question about toricity. Unfortunately, we can't make this lens in a toric, just purely and simply because sometimes you have to reposition the lens due to the visual axis during or after the op or post-op, which would obviously then cause you a big problem with the extra toricity. So unfortunately, that's not going to be an option for this lens. I've had a belting question, JP, from the United States. A surgeon has asked, I've never heard of this. Are you familiar with Krukenberg's spindle?
Oh, yeah. Actually, I got an email. I did get an email from one of the reps, which I haven't yet replied to. I only got it on Friday, about the patient with Krukenberg spindles. Look, I mean, if the patient's got good vision, it's not, so there's a bit of pigment there. It wouldn't, as long as it's not massively significant, not having a big effect on vision, I can't see it being a big issue.
Great, thanks for that. Another question we've got, I've been kind of beavering away in the background while you've been talking, so forgive me if you've mentioned it already. Somebody's asked about if a patient has dry eye, what would your thoughts be on this?
Again, it comes down to the severity of the dry eye, why they've got dry eye. You know, you've got to look at dry eye can be caused by so many different mechanisms. So it's a question of understanding the underlying etiology for it, you know, rheumatoid, any other systemic and autoimmune type things. It's knowing what you're expecting that disease progress to be. Is this something that potentially you think that, look, this patient's going to get worse dry eye as they get older? How severe is it? How manageable is it? I think mild dry eye in the absence of any other pathology that's likely to create problems. Again, all of these things come down to a discussion and counselling with the patient. But I think if they've got significant disease and there's an issue that this is going to get worse, then again, you know, why do you want to take that risk? I'd be wary of that sort of patient.
Yeah. I think when people ask me these, go on, sorry, JP.
You can give them a trial of lubricant. You know, you can trial them with lubricants as well for a period of time. You know, if they come to see you and they've got a bit of dry eye and they're a little bit symptomatic, but you don't see too much else going on, you know, you can give them lubrication for a bit and see them back in a few weeks or a few months and reevaluate it and see where they're at. That's another option.
Great. Thanks for that. We've had one thing just to add that when surgeons ask me this question, and it's probably a bit of a cop-out, but I basically say, well, would you want to work on this patient in 5 years' time, having put a multifocal lens in? And sometimes it makes them think twice, so that can be an option. One final question. I don't know about the pronunciation of this name, from Zara Ashina. Mr. Donju, would you routinely decide on multifocal IOLs based on aberrometry results, even in perfect looking corneas?
Yes, is the answer to that. I would. There's no such thing as a perfect cornea. There's always some aberration there, and you know, you just need to understand what it is. I would always look at at their aberrometry as part of my routine practice. It's very easy, it's very straightforward to do. Only takes a few seconds on the pentacam to do it. And you know, it's part of your screening process. For me, yes.
Brilliant. Thanks for that. Okay, well, there will be more chance for JP to answer, sorry, Dr. Donju to answer questions at the end of this. I'm going to move on now to our next, thank you very much, Dr. Donju, to our next presenter, who is Professor Jan Venter. Now, he's had a long and distinguished career in ophthalmology. I know he won't thank me for too much for saying the long, with many prestigious awards and a vast array of firsts in his field. These firsts include, in 1985, he introduced ambulatory cataract surgery into South Africa. He also performed the first excimer laser treatment in South Africa in 1993. Wow. Professor Venter was the first person to commercially implant a ClearView 3 lens in the UK in 2012, and followed this up with the first ClearView 3 multi-patient peer-reviewed paper a year later. He's held the post of Medical Director at Optical Express from 2007 to 2014, and is a past professor of the University of Stellenbosch in South Africa. Professor Venter has performed in excess of over 100,000 intraocular surgical procedures. He's presented over 400 papers at international ophthalmology meetings and has had 45 peer-reviewed papers published. In December, he celebrates 50 years of marriage to his wife, Anita. He's also 3 grown children who have given him grandkids as well. Mainly living in Mauritius now, lucky man. Professor Venter still travels the world, attending seminars and delivering papers. This also gives him the chance to catch up with his children who've flown the nest far and wide now. However, you will rarely see him anywhere around the world without his wife Anita by his side, either work or pleasure. Professor Venter played rugby to a very high standard, and he's also a huge rugby fan as well. He's at his happiest when watching his beloved South African Springboks dismantling another team. Unfortunately, they have a habit of doing this to England, especially in World Cup finals. Not that he ever reminds me of this, of course. Today's second lecture will discuss his experiences using the ClearView 2. With over 2,000 ClearViews implanted, Professor Venter is one of the world's most prolific surgeons with these lenses. He recently had a peer review paper published which showed data and the all-important patient satisfaction in nearly 1,200 eyes. And he's going to explain some more about this. Over to you, Prof. Venter.
Thank you very much, Jim.
So I need to stop sharing.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you for that introduction. I'm going to give a review on the ClearView 2, the safety, efficacy, and patient-reported outcomes. Why is it not sharing? Now, as we all know, this is a asymmetric segmented multifocal, and the design is to improve contrast sensitivity, minimize halos, glare, and provide good near, intermediate, and distance vision. It has a true to-the-Hopter sector-shaped ad with a seamless transition zone between the distance and the near segments. Now, the advantage of a segmented design is, firstly, you have a minimum of transition zones, and that leads to a minimum of halo and glare. Also, we have a minimum of light loss that leads to good contrast sensitivity. And as JP has discussed, it works well in a pupil that's 3 millimeters or bigger. This is, for instance, a power map of the lens, and one can see the distance vision, the neutral area between distance and the reading part of the lens. With only 2 transition zones and no concentric rings, with the ClearView 2, there's only 6 to 7% loss of light. This creates less visual disturbances, better color recognition, brighter images, and helps with the overall quality of vision. This you've seen from JP, where we have a diffractive lens where there's significant scattering, and then we have a segmental lens where there is significantly less scattering of the light. This shows a diffractive lens and a segmental lens, and one can see there's significantly less loss of light with the segmental lens, which would then improve your quality of vision and the clarity of the vision. This comes from the study where we published the first ClearView 3s, and we looked at the glare. And if you look at the glare, we used the halometer. This was what the glare, the red we got with the ClearView 3, and we compared it with a trifocal lens, and you can see that the glare is significantly less than with a diffractive lens, and in this case, a trifocal lens. If we look at the study that we did and the publication we did, we looked at ClearView 2 lenses, multifocals, implanted between August 2020 and May 2021. All patients completed at least 1 clinical follow-up visit within 1 year of the primary implant. The number of eyes, 1,190, 595 patients, and 93% were immediate sequential bilateral cataract surgery treatments. These are the parameters, and you can see we have 595 eyes, age 55, 50-50 male-female, and as one would expect, significantly more hyperopic patients. We treated patients from plano to +9 in the hyperopic sphere, and in the myopic sphere, we treated from -11 to -0.25. This is incorrect. We selected patients that was less than 1.5 diopters of pre-op cylinder. Looking at binocular uncorrected distance visual acuity, 90% of patients had 20/20 or better uncorrected distance visual acuity. Looking at intermediate vision, 6/12, 20/40, 72% had 20/40 or better intermediate vision, and that was measured at 60 centimeters. Looking at near vision, 20/30, J2 or better, 82.5% achieved that. If we look at change in best corrected vision or safety, 2% of patients lost more than 2 lines of best corrected vision. This was mostly due to PCO, which was treated with a YAG laser. Looking at patient satisfaction and quality of vision, 87% of patients were satisfied or very satisfied, 94% would recommend it, and 93.3% would have the procedure again. This is quite important. If we look at quality of vision, glare, halo, starburst, ghosting, none of the patients had severe glare, halo, starburst, or ghosting at the 2-month when we did all the data, where we looked at the data. So the Lenstec, this is wrong. ClearVision provides a safe and effective intraocular lens. It has shown a low incidence of visual phenomena in the first year, and patients had great uncorrected distance, intermediate, and near vision. We then did a comparison to see how would it compare to a low-ad diffractive lens. So we looked at the ClearViews we did, which was 1,190, and we compared it with a diffractive lens, which we did in 2020, and we used that as a comparison. All patients completed at least 1 clinical follow-up visit within 1 year. For the ClearView, 2 months. For the low-ad, 4 months. We treated patients from -12 to +9. Again, this is wrong. I don't know why it's there. It's not the right presentation, 375. We had 2,422 eyes in the low-ad diffractive group, and we had 595 eyes in the ClearView segmental multifocal group. Here's the demographics and preoperative parameters, and it's very comparable as far as age goes, as far as male-female goes, myopia, hyperopia, the refractive hyperopic sphere, myopic sphere. These were very, very comparative. Comparing the two, firstly, if we look at uncorrected binocular distance visual acuity, for the ClearView 2, 90% had 20/20 or better vision, compared to the 86% for the low-ad diffractive lens. Intermediate vision, 6/12, 20/40, 72%, as in the previous presentation, and the low-ad was also 72%. Looking at reading vision, uncorrected near vision, 6/9, 20/30, J2 or better was 82%, and I think it's 85% for the diffractive low-ad lens. Safety, there's no real statistically significant difference in the safety profile between the two lenses. If we look at satisfaction, patient-reported outcomes, 87% ClearView satisfied, very satisfied. For the low-ad, it was 90%. It's not really statistically significant. Recommend 94, 95, again, not really statistically significant. Glare, this is no post-op glare, and we can see the ClearView 2 had statistically significantly less dysphotopsia, glare halos compared to a low-ad diffractive lens. So in conclusion, the ClearView 2 provides a safe and an effective intraocular lens option. The performance is comparable to a premium multifocal lens. The patient-reported satisfaction is very high, and the ClearView implants report less halos, starburst than a diffractive lens. We just need a longer follow-up because the data was collected at 2 months. We need maybe a year data collection to review it. It's always very difficult to get patients back because once they are satisfied with their outcomes, you don't see them again unless they have a problem. So it's only the problem patients that come back for another review. Thank you for your attention.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Prof. That's brilliant. Really appreciate that. We've had a couple of questions in again, a little bit more probably for direct Lenstec to answer. A couple that are pertinent is that it states you've implanted over 2,000 ClearView lenses. Have you had many explants?
We have had in total about, if we look at the explant rate, it is about 5 per 1,000 eyes, the explant rate. And when you do an explant, if you explant the dominant eye, we always implant a monofocal lens with an explant. 66% of patients with one exchange in the dominant eye are satisfied with the visual outcome, a reduction in glare, that they don't request the second lens to be exchanged. And they retain quite a significant portion of their reading. 33% of the patients who we exchange will come back and have the second eye exchanged as well.
Well, that's
So it's
interesting.
about 5 in 1,000.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
I've never heard that statistic and about changing the non-dominant, changing the dominant eye.
Yeah.
Do you find that any of the patients get the what I call mix and match syndrome, where they do that and then they do that once they've got a monofocal in their eye?
When you look at their satisfaction rate, the satisfaction rate drops because you have a monofocal in one eye.
Yeah.
But if you replace one multifocal with another multifocal, your symptoms persist because it's the brain that's unable to adjust to the lens. So we've stopped changing one lens. Initially, we changed for a different design, for a diffractive lens, but the symptoms remain. So you have to do a monofocal, and that works well. And I'm actually about to publish that, and we have 44,000 eyes we have analyzed.
Just a few then.
Just a few.
Good. No, that's interesting. That I didn't know that myself. As they say, every day is a school day. I've got a question here. Is from Jag Chowler. What is the PCO rate for this lens? I know it is quite a bit higher than some of the other lenses, but what's your experience?
It's about 20 to 30% of the PCO rate over a year to 2 years. So it's definitely higher than with other lenses, yes.
So do you find yagging these a problem or?
No, no problem yagging them, no.
Yeah, okay, that's great. And from Juan Rotunda, what is the younger age you would recommend for the use of ClearView 2?
We will implant it in any patient that is presbyopic. I think presbyopic patient, you need a reading aid of at least 1.5 before we would consider implanting a multifocal lens, whether it's a ClearView 2 or a ClearView 3. The most important part is the presbyopic part. We will do plano presbyo patients, but there we will probably mix it with the ClearView 3 because those patients want reading vision, and if they don't obtain reading vision, they are significantly unhappy.
Good, thank you. Another question here. I suppose you mentioned, we discussed explants. What's the sort of longest time that you would kind of give a lens if a patient's unhappy before you decide, okay, we need to get it out, whether it's fibrosing or whatever?
Firstly, if a patient is unhappy from day one with the lens, it's no use waiting for a year to see if his symptoms improve.
Yeah, of
He's
course.
really unhappy, poor quality of vision, then within a month or two, I think one should exchange the lens. But if a patient can tolerate the lens and they read well and they feel they can manage it, we normally wait up to a year before we exchange the lens.
And what's your experience of changing the lens at 1 year with regards to the capsule? And
it can be difficult, but mostly one can remove a lens And if it's difficult to remove the lens, you're going to implant a monofocal lens. So you just amputate the haptics and you insert a new lens in the sulcus with optic capture, and that then works well. So you don't need to fish the whole lens out and damage the capsular bag or the zonules.
No, actually, you've mentioned to me in the past about tension rings. What are your thoughts on using tension rings?
Well, preferably yes, because if you have to change the lens, that makes your life much easier if you have a tension ring in.
Yeah. Okay.
And,
I know
if you change
the jury's
lens,
out on that one.
Yeah. And if you change the lens and you implant a new lens in the back, put a tension ring in.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks for that. Okay, I think for now that's about it. We're getting questions in all the time. Some of them are really just for Lenstec to answer.
Yeah.
On our side. But otherwise, if you just obviously hang on till the end a little bit, that'd be great.
Okay.
Right. Thanks a lot, Professor Venter. Okay, last but not least, God, this has flown by, hasn't it? We have Dr. Eva Kim. I had the pleasure of meeting Dr. Kim at the AO last year. She approached us having heard from a colleague about this newly FDA-approved lens that didn't have concentric rings. We sat down at the booth and had an in-depth discussion about the benefits of the lens and what it can actually do. This led to Dr. Kim putting in her first ClearView 3 lenses in November 2022 in Denver. I know this because I turned up to the Mile High City with only a light coat. The forecast looked actually okay, but unfortunately I didn't take into account the wind chill. Cold was not the word. I think she's still laughing at me now about this. Since then, Dr. Kim, Dr. Goldhair, and Dr. Littoffer partners have been regular users of the ClearView 3 at Icon Eye Care. That's not an easy word when you're trying to present something. Dr. Kim graduated from Stanford University and then obtained a medical degree from the University of California. She undertook an ophthalmology residency at Harvard Medical School before finishing back at the University of California. I apologize if I get the pronunciation wrong here. Whilst practicing at Kaiser Permanente in San Francisco, Dr. Kim also held the post of lead communications officer for 7 years, overseeing surgeon-to-surgeon and surgeon-to-patient communication. Also, for 5 straight years, Dr. Kim was ranked #1 out of 258 surgeons in Northern California for patient service. She's now Front Range Medical Director and Vice President of Operations at Icon Eye Care. The practice is a high-volume cataract clinic, which involves a large percentage of premium lenses, including femtosecond laser assistance. Dr. Kim also specializes in corneal and external diseases and also uveitis. Devoting her spare time to her family with her husband Chuck and 3 children, they're often away on ski trips or attending the many sporting events that the kids are involved in. Dr. Kim also loves music and dance. In general, things have gone really well at Icon. However, no procedure is perfect, as we've already discussed. And as you've heard from Dr. Donju, there isn't one-size-fits-all option with lenses. Sometimes you'll encounter a problem within a group of otherwise happy patients. Dr. Kim has really communicated with Lenstec to work through these and being able to understand more and more about the procedure as a result. By communicating in this way, clinicians really understand how this design of lens fits in with their practice, even though they already have well-established lens options. The final lecture today will discuss how to integrate a premium lens into your established practice and how to overcome initial setbacks in order to move forward, all from a standing start. Dr. Kim, over to you.
Thank you, Jim. And thank you to our lecturers. I definitely learned so much this morning, or morning for me, afternoon for you, for most of you. So it's really an honor to be here today. I have the Golden Gate Bridge behind me because I have spent most of my life in the Bay Area, that we call it San Francisco Bay Area. but about 7.5 years ago, moved to Denver. It's a little known secret that everyone thinks it's freezing. And Jim, you need to come and visit us when the weather is nicer, which is probably from about March until October. So we have a really long period of time when it's in the 90s, nice and dry. So hopefully we'll get you out again, but during the summer.
I'd love to.
We'd love to host you. So I'm going to speak to you about refractive cataract surgery, specifically with my experience. It's really an early experience with the ClearView 3, since it was just FDA approved in July of 2022. I also wanted to note to everybody, no matter what, how many years you've put into being an ophthalmologist, my career is a little bit different because I spent about 12 years in fairly medical-based practice, comprehensive ophthalmology, did a good amount of cataract surgery, mostly with standard lenses, just because that was the group that I was with. It was a practice that was an integrated medical system with every single specialty, including ophthalmology, internal medicine, general surgery. So we really were focusing on doing standard cataract surgery. I also spent about 50% of my time taking care of patients with uveitis. We had 19 medical centers in Northern California, and I took care of all of those patients that would come for the 19 centers, and would, basically spend a lot of time diagnosing the uveitis and starting patients if they needed to be on systemic autoimmune related or immunomodulating medications. And so I bring this up because I did not start out as a refractive surgeon. I was kind of a nerdy academic in a big center, and made a big change in 2018 when I joined my current group, Icon Eye Care, and kind of did a while at work fellowship, learning how to become a corneal refractive surgeon. I am a cornea specialist, but did not practice it much in my career, and then becoming a high volume cataract refractive surgeon. These are my disclosures, and none are relevant to this talk. So I kind of went through my experience and my career experience. Icon Eye Care is located in Denver, Colorado. We have 6 clinics, and we have one out in kind of the mountain area called Grand Junction. We also have clinics under different brand names in Dallas, Texas area and Phoenix, Arizona area. So I originally became interested in the ClearView 3 multifocal lens because one of my colleagues at the Texas group, he was one of the chief ophthalmologists, and his name is Tony Evangelista. Dr. Evangelista was a very charismatic member of our group. He is now retired, but at the time that I joined, he was still working and operating. And he was in the United States FDA trials for the ClearView 3 multifocal lens. He was very vocal about his experience with the lens, and he admitted that the outcomes were so fantastic and his patients were so happy that he would want to have this IOL implanted in his eyes when he had to have cataract surgery. And as we all know, as surgeons, that's difficult to pin down. When you ask a surgeon, what lens would you pick for yourself? It's difficult to really feel very, very strongly about which lens you would like. And so I thought, this must be an amazing lens if Dr. Evangelista would have his own eyes implanted with this lens. So then once it was FDA approved, he implanted bilaterally the ClearView 3 into, we have a compliance leader in our company. She's she's a nurse, basically. That's her training, but she's now our leader of compliance across the entire nation for our company. And so she's very picky. She actually had Symphony lenses, multifocal lenses implanted over 10 years ago by Dr. Evangelista, and her husband, who is an anesthesiologist, kind of a picky guy, still working. He decided to choose the ClearView 3 once it was FDA approved. And Dr. Evangelista implanted this lens into his eyes for a refractive lens exchange. He did not even really have significant cataracts. He was a +2 hyperope and, of course, very presbyopic. And he's just, kind of been a bit of a poster child in the Texas region for how great his outcomes have been. And then finally, I also heard stories that at our clinic in Arizona, in Swagel-Wooten, Dr. Lawan Ramsey, who was one of the first U.S. surgeons to implant the ClearView 3 outside of the trials, he implanted bilaterally this lens into our operations leader, his grandfather, who did have significant cataracts. He was also hyperopic, about a +3, and just feels like he is 20 years younger. I think he's coming up on 80 years old, and he just felt like he was given a new lease on life, and just could not speak more highly about it. So I, of course, heard these amazing stories in addition to Dr. Evangelista's raving about it during the clinical trial time. So this is just showing that there's the near segment on the IOL and the distance, and I have it in this kind of vertical position here, and you can see that there is the leading haptic on the right side with the little puncture opening. There's also, I think, a little bit less obvious is there's a little divot near that opening that can just help the surgical scrub tech and the surgeon localize where that near segment is during implantation and during folding. Okay, so I was then extremely motivated once I heard about the FDA approval of the ClearView 3 lens in July 2022. I took the opportunity in October of 2022 to seek out the Lenstec booth at American Academy of Ophthalmology, where I quickly met Jim, who's been wonderful. He's been a wonderful guide for us, our group, ever since we met. I was fairly persistent in explaining that I really wanted to be the absolute next location that Jim visited in the US to get us started, because we have a habit at Icon Eye Care of wanting to try new technologies. We're not afraid to do that. I think typically people feel fairly happy with their armamentarium of IOLs, and we're a little bit different. We want to try new things all the time, and not every one of them sticks. Not every one of them stays in the toolbox. But this IOL, ClearView 3, has definitely gained traction. So Jim came to visit me with a little bit of pre-visit education. Came to visit me in November, and it was a very cold trip, and he almost had a canceled flight due to the snow that was dumping. And I was able to perform, I can't remember exactly, maybe a couple of surgeries that day. I was trying to pile several on, but sometimes it's difficult to get too many patients on the same day. But this is one of my first patients that I implanted with her permission. I'm posting her photograph, and this woman, we actually, I just saw her probably 6 weeks ago, and she has 20/20 distance vision and 20/25 near vision. I would say the only part that's a little bit difficult with her is that she has really developed dementia over time, even since I implanted her lenses in November. So her ability to describe her experience has become less and less clear, but we are able to, objectively find out that she is 20/20 distance and 20/25 near, and spectacle free when she used to wear hyperopic glasses. So since November, myself and my colleagues, I've done the majority, but we have implanted about 118 ClearView 3s to date. And just so you guys know, probably our go-to multifocal was a diffractive IOL, the Alcon PanOptix IOL multifocal lens. And, that's definitely was the competitor to ClearView 3. So we've heard about patient selection criteria from our previous speakers, and it's been such an educational process for me. Thank you so much, because I have such a short time of experience. What I have found in my very short time of experience is that the ideal patient in my practice really desires spectacle freedom above all. And when I say that, I will describe to the patient that when we are using a multifocal lens, no matter which lens we use, they will, because of the splitting of light that occurs, they will have less exact, extremely clear, for instance, distance vision compared to a monofocal choice when they pick a multifocal choice. And these are the patients that say, the highest priority for me is I cannot wear glasses. I mean, it's just, they describe it as, I'm not going to wear them. They hurt me. They make me dizzy. They press on my nose. They press on my, my temples, behind my ears. There's just a lot of complaint in that area. And I think that I'll say, well, you may or may not notice, but there is just a little bit of, you're going to notice a little takeaway potentially at all of the distances of your vision may not be as sharp as if in the case if you had picked a multifocal for distance, or a monofocal for distance, or a monofocal for near. And this patient will say, oh yeah, that's fine, no problem, that's okay, I just don't want to wear glasses. So this is the perfect patient. Because we only have ClearView 3 in the United States available, of course, the ad is very strong, and patients are reporting hand over fist much more impressive near vision than I have noticed with the other multifocal that I use. So when I have a patient who does value very, very excellent near vision, and that would be, for instance, someone who does jewelry work, crocheting, some kind of craft work, loves to read without glasses, I will suggest the ClearView 3 as opposed to the PanOptix. There are some patients who come in who will say, I have a friend who has a PanOptix or another diffractive multifocal, and they will say they complain about halos, and I don't want the halos. Whatever you can do, doctor, please, I don't want the halos. So if I hear that, I will, of course, look to the ClearView 3, and I will explain that there are some dysphotopsias to be expected at night. Basically, you might have heard of the angel wing dysphotopsia. My patients describe it as some light spikes coming out of if you're looking at a headlight, instead of kind of a halo or circular blur around it. ClearView 3 patients, I will say there's a chance you will see some spikes, light spikes coming out of the headlight. And, when I am very upfront about that, patients will say, oh, that kind of reminds me of, something you might see with astigmatism. I can deal with that. I just don't want the multiple halos. So I will be very upfront about that potential of those angel wings or spikes. I am finding, thankfully, that the vast majority of my patients are neuroadapting to those spikes very quickly, more quickly than someone who is noticing or having a hard time with their halos with a diffractive multifocal, they will, my ClearView patients will have a much faster timeline when it comes to adapting to these spikes or wings. Just like any other multifocal lens, you want to find kind of a type B personality, which is basically opposite of type A. Type A being someone who is extremely analytical, maybe kind of physics or mathematics minded, might draw over and over, a picture of a floater and multiple versions in this kind of lighting and, low light, high light. Or you can sometimes ask them what their occupation is. And if it's kind of in the more analytical type A zone, you really just have to stop for a second and make sure that you're choosing the best lens for this patient. If you're type B, you can let things slide off your shoulders. You can neuroadapt to dysphotopsias. And I'm finding that this is a similar type of personality that you want to find for the ClearView 3. Again, I am in my earlier timeline for use with ClearView 3. I could probably get less conservative with time, but I'm just not wanting to run into a place where I have to explant this lens. And so I'm starting out in a more conservative place. Like our previous lectures, low corneal astigmatism, I'm kind of keeping it at 1 diopter or less. I am making sure to treat the astigmatism of the cornea with my femtosecond laser if possible. All of my patients who opt for the ClearView 3, I will use my Lenstec femtosecond laser to treat their astigmatism and to create their capsulorhexis and to partition their cataract. And I am finding with experience that I am using the ClearView 3 with a select population of patients who have had LASIK or PRK. I usually, as we talked about earlier today, I'm trying to look for corneas that are looking basically very normal, not diseased, low, higher order aberrations. Sometimes you'll find a patient who says they had LASIK or PRK and the topography looks almost like they haven't had it. There's been a low treatment. Those are better patients to go for, especially in my earlier timeline. But I will also look for patients where, if we do have to have some kind of corneal laser refractive touch-up in the future, if that is something that we need to do, that they have plenty of healthy cornea for me to do that work, so that I can rescue and make the vision better if I need to. And I explain this all very, very clearly to the patient who's choosing this package. So these are just some of my surgical tips that I'll share. Like I said, I always start with the femtosecond laser during the surgical process, and we'll treat whatever astigmatism I can. And it's nice to have that perfect, beautiful capsulorhexis. I am choosing to use the ClearView 3 for my patients who are choosing clear lens exchange or refractive lens exchange. I am performing same-day bilateral lens exchange. I have been doing this for over 15 years. I think Jim mentioned earlier that I was with Kaiser Permanente, a large medical group in California, and we did a study over 10 years ago looking at same-day bilateral cataract surgery and found that the risk of complication and infection was no higher than doing unilateral surgery, and just an incredibly much higher rate of patient satisfaction. So I continue to perform bilateral cataract surgery when patients are not using their United States medical insurance, because I'm not allowed to do that with medical insurance surgeries. But with refractive lens exchanges, I'm able to choose or offer to my patients to choose between bilateral and unilateral. And most of our patients choose bilateral same day. So once the cataract is removed, I am more than I do with my other lenses. I fill my capsular bag with a very generous amount of viscoelastic. Just, again, I think that's probably just an early days habit. I'm just trying to make sure I have lots of room to manipulate and rotate my lens to the appropriate positioning that I'm going to choose. I use a 2.4 millimeter wound for my cataract surgery, and so I continue to use that keratome, and then I will slightly enlarge it. I'm going to show you a quick video at the next slide. And I slightly enlarge it when I'm implanting the lens. And as the IOL enters my bag, I will then do a little bit more of a posterior dip in an effort to get the trailing haptics into the bag. I oftentimes will get one haptic in and one is still kind of sticking out. And then I'll use a second instrument then to get that fourth corner in and then start rotating. And our scrub technicians are trained, have been trained by Lenstec so that the IOL will exit the injector with the haptic with the opening hole on the right side of the leading haptic, which will then orient us and have the surgeon understand that it's the near segment that is leading and that it is right side up. It's in the correct positioning if it's on the right side. Just recently, I think it was a week or two ago, I did implant a lens that came with the hole on the left side of the leading haptic, which of course immediately I said, well, this lens is upside down. It was a pretty myopic patient with a very large bag, which I was glad I had filled it with lots of viscoelastic. So as it was coming out, before it kind of was really into place, I was able to within the bag just flip it so that leading haptic had the hole on the right front haptic. So, wanting to make sure it wasn't flipped upside down, I was able to take care of that quickly. And when I first started implanting in November, and probably for the first 3 months, I was instructed or trained to have the near segment kind of, because that's the US FDA approved positioning. I was instructed to have that near segment inferior or inferior nasal, and have the distance segment superior or superior temporal. And I'll explain to you in a case that was, I find now that's, I'll actually flip it 180 degrees, mostly because of advice that I have learned from JP. And that I'm finding that so much more success with patients being happy and having great near and distance vision in that position. Finally, even though there is kind of this recommended position where I'm aiming to have the near segment superotemporal and the distant segment inferonasal, I always place the lens in that position and have the patient look at my central light on my microscope, and I confirm that of course, that the anatomy is centered, so that the lens that they're looking, their visual axis is looking right through that central line area, or if anything, maybe just a little biased towards the distant segment, which would be inferonasal, a slight bias towards that, as opposed to it being completely in the near segment, as an example. So I'm just going to skip here for a second, and this is a video that I'm going to kind of skip through, but I'm showing you here that this is a patient that I've brought from the femtosecond laser into surgery, and this woman happened to have like 0.2 of SIL on Lenstar topography, so I did not add any arcs for her, kind of a rare thing to have such little SIL. So I'm going to skip ahead here. And I'm just phacoing here. And I'm going to bring us to okay, so now I'm done here with the cortex removal. And here I am just adding a lot of viscoelastic to the bag, more than I would normally. I don't usually add as much as I was saying, and I'm enlarging the wound here. Probably enlarged it a little bit more than I really needed to. But that's just an example of that. I'm now just patiently waiting for my technician to finish folding the lens and handing the injector to me. She's really great, so she's done that. Here I go, injecting the lens. Center the scope here so you can see. And here, as the ClearView 3 is coming out, you can notice that the leading haptic has the opening on the right. So we know we're right side up, and we know, how the lens is oriented. So I understand now how I'm going to rotate the lens. There's my fourth corner there that's sticking out still, but I quickly get it into the bag. And that upper segment is the near, and the lower segment is the distance. And I'm kind of doing a rotation so that we have superotemporal near, inferonasal distance. I'm asking the patient to look at my central microscope lights, and feeling like I need to make a small adjustment here, asking her again to look right there. I'm happy with the position here and committing to it. So taking my viscoelastic out. All right. So Jim or Gil, do I have time to share a quick case?
Yeah, no problem.
Okay. So this, as Jim was referring to when he was earlier, before I started, that we learn from our challenging cases. And this is a case of definitely one of my earliest patients. And he really wanted spectacle independence. He was kind of an ideal patient, I think a +1 hyperope, who was still in his other eye like 20/25, 20/30. And this eye, he was about 20/50 with a worse cataract. And so it was very early. I think he was maybe my third patient. And I surgery went well. I implanted the lens, the ClearView 3. The positioning of the ClearView 3 ended up being the FDA approved position, which was, again, having the distance segment superotemporal, the near segment inferonasal. And so that is how I implanted the lens. And when I saw him at day 1 and week 1, he was impressively, strangely myopic. He was like -250, had fantastic reading, had really horrible distance vision, as to be expected. And when I dilated him to just look at the positioning of the lens, I could tell that that the lens was decentered, so that the lens was superiorly subluxed, but not because there was a loose bag per se. I didn't experience zonular laxity during surgery. He hadn't had no trauma. It just was the positioning of his bag must have been just a little bit superior. Just so the IOL was not sitting perfectly centered, and he was looking way too far through the near segment. Now, his other eye, as you recall, was still distance. It was 20/30 with +1 hyperopia. This eye was seeing up close. Now, his dominant eye happens to be this eye. This is the eye that his brain was preferring to see distance. So he was complaining bitterly, and I didn't blame him for it. So I reached out to Jim and to Rod Zarling, the CMO, and we talked about it, and Rod's advice was, you know, probably you need to rotate it 180 degrees. And by the way, that is kind of what we're finding is like a typical position that we would recommend anyway. And so I brought the patient back. Dr. Zarling actually flew to Denver to be in the room while I was doing it. And everything went really well. I rotated the IOL. And because of that decentered anatomy of his capsular bag, the next day he was 20/15 distance and J7 near. So did not have any reading vision. And, you know, when you look at the, not surprisingly, when you look at the where his visual axis was, it was now biased into the distance segment so much, and he wasn't able to utilize the transition zone or even any of the near segment or transition zone. So he was really kind of like a monofocal distance patient in that eye. And so then he was even more distressed over time because he had this very sharp distance eye. His other eye was hyperopic. He said, "I'm back in reading glasses. You've done nothing for me. Everything is a mess." He was very upset. And so I explained to him that I felt very strongly that his next eye had the possibility of having the same kind of decentered anatomy, and that I didn't really have a way to predict if his capsular bag was centered. So he has not yet had cataract surgery in his left eye. And I've put him through monovision contact lens trial for the left eye, and he has failed that. So he doesn't like monovision. And so still deciding what to do, but he's, you know, we haven't done anything yet. So I'm open to suggestions on what to do with his other eye. But this is just one of those cases where I definitely learned and have since then started doing the opposite of the FDA recommendation and putting the distance segment superior temporally. And really since then have had really, really happy patients, not one patient who has had any issues. And it's difficult to, I know that capsular bag being decentered is a very rare situation. So I know it's not something I need to really, really worry about, but it was just an interesting case to have. And so to be continued. And if we do one of these again and I'm on, I will let you know what we did with his left eye. All right. Well, thank you so much for your attention. And again, just wanting to let you know that the ClearView 3 is just a really excellent tool in our toolbox. And we are finding that we have extremely happy patients, patients who are hoping to be spectacle free, hoping to have great distance, intermediate, and near vision, who have low corneal astigmatism, and have, you know, just really the correct expectations for the outcome. I appreciate your attention.
Hey. Oops, can you hear me?
Yep.
Right, great. Thanks, Eva. That's great. That's fantastic. So we are prepared to dish the dirt as well. That's great. Thank you for that information. Well, not everything's perfect, and I think that's a good point. That what you've made is the fact that sometimes when you're starting up from anew, you will get a curveball, and sometimes things don't always work out perfect. But you've kind of worked things through, and you've found your way of it sitting in your practice now, and we really appreciate that. So thank you very much. With a couple of questions, you mentioned one of the lenses going in upside down. This is from Gerard Ainsworth. So long as the lens is centered, does it matter if the lens is flipped over back to front?
So my understanding is that, and you probably will have to correct me, Jim, but it's not, for the distance segment, it's not really going to be an issue. For, I believe, the reading segment, you do lose a small percentage of your reading ad, but it's not significant. I can't remember how much loss there is, but it's not too significant. Do you
I
want
think
to
it's
fill that
actually-
in, Jim?
Yeah, sorry, I think it's about 0.12 of a diopter. Basically, it's a
Okay.
mathematical equation of the distance to the front to the back of the lens, that's all. So it because of the ridge on the bottom of the lens, the only possible issue, I wouldn't be worried about near or anything like that. The only possible issue is it may encourage a slightly quicker PCO because of the rim on it. But I wouldn't worry about
you
it.
don't have that square edge on the back. You've got the square edge
Yeah.
on the back, but not on the front. So
Yeah.
that might make a bit of a difference. But it's the 0 degree angulation on the lens itself. So it's not, the lens isn't actually going to be displaced whichever way you put it in. But as Jim says, there's a slight difference because of how the power distribution goes through.
Yeah.
Good to know.
Great, thanks for that.
Definitely good to know.
So, Dr. Kim, if you're doing one eye at a time, do you do the dominant or non-dominant eye first? And do you undertake mini or micro monovision with the lens?
So no, I don't do mini or mono microvision. I haven't found that we've had any need for that. I have implanted monofocal distance and ClearView 3 in the non-dominant eye. I have done that with some excellent success. It's just that person who kind of wants to split the difference, is a little nervous about wanting to have that perfect distance, but still wants the multifocal, so and then I'll be really honest with you. I have, if the cataract, I'll use cataracts specifically. If the cataract is, there's a worse one on one eye, I do what the patient wants, but I will explain, I'll kind of bring them into the conversation. But when it comes to things like refractive lens exchange, I would say overwhelmingly, I'm doing bilateral same day. So I haven't really had to think about this. So you're bringing a good question up to me, whether or not, to do the non-dominant. But I guess if I had a patient who was wanting them done separately, I would do the non-dominant eye first. Absolutely.
Yeah, kind of as a company, it's kind of what we recommend, but it's not really a battle we want to fight. If someone really wants to do the dominant eye first and they're comfortable with it, then I think the main thing is if you're doing dominant eye first, you've got to be really sure of your biometry because you've got to nail that distance. And I think that's one of the things is once you decide that the patient's right for this lens, then you kind of pretty much treat it as a distance lens with the 3. I don't know if you find that.
Yes, agree.
Yeah, great. I've got another. No, sorry. Right. I had to nip out for a second during the talk, so I do apologise. But if you've mentioned this, I do apologise. Have you operated on many post-LASIK patients? And if so, what are your exclusion criteria for that?
Very similar to Dr. Danjou. Just looking for, yes, I've absolutely used ClearView 3 with post LASIK patients, post PRK patients. I'm just really looking for a fairly pristine, healthy cornea. As a cornea specialist, I'm pretty picky about, how healthy and how basically low, having a low higher order aberration profile. It's pretty much the way I would treat a diffractive multifocal. So I don't rule it out. Some people are pretty conservative, and I respect it. I really do. Like, why get yourself into trouble with a complex, with 2 complex surfaces, right? But the problem is that the patients who want multifocal lenses and who cannot tolerate monovision, those are the patients that want multifocals. Just that's over and over again. That's what they value, is spectacle-free vision. So you really just, I'm finding that I have to be able to be brave and be courageous, but also do the right thing for the patient. And as long as I am happy with their topography and their higher order aberration profile, I will utilize the multifocal lenses. Absolutely. And like I said, I like formula?
Sorry.
I mean, I use Barrett Truquet typically.
Yeah.
And then I'm trying my best to add data to the Aura system
Yeah.
for you guys. But it's
The
been
more
a
the
little
merrier.
it's been a little tricky, it's a little time consuming,
Yeah.
but trying to understanding that for the bigger cause, it's hopefully going to be helpful potentially
Fingers
for
crossed.
us to be able to give that data to everyone. So, but that's usually what I'll follow, and then I'll go, plano to first hyperopia, with your advice, and I'm finding that is that's going pretty well.
Yeah, I think you just said there that, like I say, just aim for the closest to zero if possible. Don't be because the quarter diopters, don't be tempted to skip to the next minors because you want to give them reading. Plus the add is loads, and I mean it's 2.4 at the spectacle plane. If you can't see with 2.4, you've got other issues. So anyway, thank you, Dr. Kim. There's a few general questions. I'll point them to certain people because I know what they've done. Professor Venter, what's your experience? And sorry about this, Dr. Kim, because you can't use it yet. What's your experience of mix and matching ClearView 2s and 3s?
It works very well. And those patients seem to have, we haven't done a study yet, and we haven't analyzed the data, but just by talking to the patients and talking to them about their symptoms, they seem to have less dysphotopsia if their dominant eye has a ClearView 2 and the non-dominant eye a 3.
Great. And do you find any of what I call mix and match syndrome where they definitely notice a difference between the two lenses?
They do, but I think one tries to tell the patient not to do that. And once they start doing that, it's very difficult for them to change it. But I think when you do the consultation with them, you explain to them that the vision will be different in the two eyes, and you will only function when you use both eyes together. That will be optimal function of the lenses.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, nobody walks around with one eye closed, do they, unless they're a pirate? But I think that one of the other things as well is when they do that, I kind of notice when I do that, you're looking at distance as well. You don't do that when you're reading. So, of course, with the multifocal, it's not going to be, or with the higher ad, it's not going to be as good anyway.
Yeah, but the reading there will be a bit of a difference if they start comparing.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
They never do it until they've had surgery. Then they start doing it.
Yeah, I know. Frustrated, isn't it? Thank you. Dr. Donju from Jagchowla in the UK. Do you offer IPI stroke Tixel therapy pre-op in borderline dry eye patients?
No, not routinely. It's as I say, with borderline dry eye, we, obviously you look for the cause. You look if they've got blepharitis, meibomian gland dysfunction, and you might want to manage that. But normally we'll just say, look, you can try some lubricants for a while and let's see where you're at. Give them advice on hygiene measures, hot compresses, that sort of thing. The basic stuff, basically. I think once it's getting to a point where you think you've got to do other interventions on them, then maybe you're barking up the wrong tree with wanting to use multifocal technology. There's a lot of things out there that you're fighting against. There's a desire by the patient what they want, but you as a surgeon as well, you've got to respect the fact that sometimes they've got conditions. They're not going to go away, these problems. There's no definitive cure for some of these other problems that they've got. It's management of them, and if you can manage them and manage them well, and the patient's comfortable, then yes, it's reasonable to put a lens in. But if you think you're struggling and this is going to be an issue for the patient, then monofocal lenses in those patients probably it's at the end of the day, it causes less hassle for you as a surgeon.
Yeah, agreed. Right, I've got a couple of questions for both of you. Before I'm going to ask you one that will throw the cat amongst the pigeons, but first, a fairly simple one. It'd be interesting to hear both of you, Dr. Donju, while you're on. Then obviously you can start. We've had a question, do you exclude patients based on occupations, examples, lawyers, which is a good one, and engineers? You know what I mean, though, basically.
Personally, no. It's all down to counselling. You know, it's an informed consent process, and if you counsel them and you document your discussion, which is key, so that when they come, but if they have problems, they come back. Well, actually, look, it's here. We've documented it. We've discussed this. It's been done. Then and they accept that, then that's reasonable. I mean, there may be certain occupations where, you know, for one reason or another, you're not going to use it because it's not recommended, or that, you know, that it's specifically not allowed. Then that's different. But
Yeah,
no, otherwise, I think it comes down to informed consent and discussion.
yeah.
Agree.
Next on my screen is Prof. What would you say?
Agree with JP as far as that goes. But I'm careful with HGV drivers. And as far as I recollect, commercial pilots are not allowed to have a multifocal lens. I don't know if I'm still like that, JP.
Sorry, what was that, Jan?
Commercial pilots, you're not allowed to put a multifocal lens in their eyes.
Yeah. So that's out because you just can't use it.
Right.
But you know, but yeah, I agree with the HGV driver situation. It's always a tricky one.
It comes down to consent process.
It does. It's informed consent, and as you get, it's also you'll get that experience with the lens as well. The more you use and the more you learn about the problems that people face with dysphotopsia, not just the occupational nighttime one, but just patients in general. That builds up your confidence, and actually this is not a real big problem, and I can, and you can explain to them, look, this is the sort of things that we get people telling us they experience. It doesn't necessarily stop them driving. And again, with the nighttime and the occupational drivers, again, it comes down to the sort of how they drive, where they drive. Are they driving it on unlit roads, or if they're driving around town in taxi drivers in bright lights and the rest of it. There's differences there as well.
Just before I ask Dr. Kim, I've just had a question from one of our American colleagues. Can he explain what HGV driver is? It's someone who drives really big trucks. Stands for heavy goods vehicle. Sorry, I do apologise. We get caught up in it. So I'm interested in hearing Dr. Kim's answer about working on lawyers in the States.
Oh, I take care of a lot of lawyers, and I think lawyers are not as scientifically analytical as you might think. I think people worry about lawyers because of the fact that they can, be litigious potentially.
Yeah.
But that's not necessarily true. I take care of a lot of them. I think I'm a little bit more wary of patients who come in and really want to discuss optics and draw pictures and have diagrams. And those patients, I will explain from the get-go that I sense that they really value clarity and perfection in the distance, in the near, and that I just am not sure that a multifocal will give them what they're looking for, and that I think it might be worth wearing spectacles to obtain it. Yeah,
I understand that one.
I'll just kind of say, I'm feeling this energy from you. that you are, you want perfect vision, and they'll say, well, of course, yeah. And I'll say, I just and that you would value perfect vision over having to wear some kind of spectacles, over having to get rid of the spectacles and having just like potentially a little soft line around something. And they just agree with me. It's like a rhetorical discussion, and then I pretty much kind of talk them out of a multifocal. But not everyone. I'm just saying there are some intense, it's just like whatever level, right? And then some people, when they convince me that it really is spectacle independence, that is the most important thing to them, then of course, then I will do exactly as Dr. Danjou said with all of my patients, just really having the patient understand what the true expectations are, documenting that very, very well. I mean, we have sort of a structured documentation that's already in our note when it comes to multifocals. But then if it's a particularly picky type of patient, I'll add in some additional sort of personalized documentation of, you know, how deeply we discussed something, so that we can, you know, if it ever comes back around to it, I can, if I have to, I can say, you know, we talked about this.
Yeah, like JP says, document it.
The patients are so excited, it's overwhelming. They don't remember the conversations. And so it's good to really document.
To be honest, I'm surprised you guys don't record it.
True.
We do now.
Do you?
Oh,
We recorded and we video recorded as well the consent process.
Yeah.
Good
And
idea.
that's the way to go, to be honest. Just a couple of quick ones regarding mix and match. Somebody's asked if you will put a 2 in the dominant eye and a 3 in the non-dominant eye, then yes, that's what we recommend.
That's what
The two in the non-dominant, the 2 in the dominant eye, sorry.
Yes.
I'll give you this one, Prof, because I know you've kind of done this a little bit in the past. Especially in the States, the ClearView 3 is only approved down to 15 diopter. So if they have a high myope, what Mazinaldo in Detroit's asking is that would you be prepared to put a ClearView 3 in one eye and a J&J Technis multifocal in the other with a lower diopter?
Yeah, sure.
No problem.
Multifocals, no problem. They can easily mix. If we look initially, when we exchanged one of the lenses, we put a low power lens in the other eye, multifocal, and those patients were happy. But if you put equal power lens multifocal back into the eye, they were not happy. So yes.
Brilliant. Thank you. I hope that answers your question.
Yes.
Good. So we're okay. We're getting to the point where everybody's probably started to fall asleep a little bit. So final question, and this is kind of like the age-old, especially a very topical argument at the moment. Somebody has asked, why would you use this lens in hydrophilic when hydrophobic is so much of a better option? Again, I'll put this to all three of you. You know, you've all got long-term experience. Well, Dr. Kim obviously is a little bit later, but you know, you two have both used it for over 10 years. Dr. Kim, I know, obviously works closely with Alcon, so she's very used to hydrophobic lenses. I'd be interested to hear your comments on this with the difference between hydrophilic, hydrophobic, if you have any issues. Prof, you're on now, you might as well speak.
Jim, to be honest with you, I don't have much of an issue. I am comfortable with both. I find both easy to yak. I don't have a problem with that. But we have seen some late glistening of the lenses, which can be a problem. But that's very rare.
Hydrophobics.
Yeah, so that's the only thing. Otherwise, I'm comfortable using both.
So other than the obviously well-documented PCO, you've not seen any other issues with this lens?
No.
No, and that's with 11 years, yeah?
Yeah, nothing else.
Same here. 10 months in.
No, but obviously you've got a lot of experience through your Alcon connections with hydrophobic, and
yes,
you know,
yes.
Is there any difference?
I mean, in short time.
I don't want to get you in trouble with Alcon, by the way.
Well, Alcon it has a new platform.
Yes, of course.
Clarion material, which we've been using for just about over a year as well. Mm-hmm. And so, you know, not really seeing glistenings in that hydrophobic, but new material platform. Definitely haven't had any issues with ClearView 3. And, you know, the PCO, we just routinely tell our refractive lens exchange patients that this is the deal. You have surgery and then you have a YAG.
Yeah.
They just, like, we just tell them, like, you might get a YAG. No, you will have a YAG. So they know, and it's a part of their package because they are using no insurance to have refractive lens exchange. And so they just know, like, okay, I'll have a YAG in both eyes at some point, you know, so they don't think it's abnormal, and it's just the norm for them. So that's how we deal with that.
Great. I think you're correct there. I think one of the issues with PCO is when it's a surprise. And, you know, we don't claim to be the best PCO in the world. You know, it's there. Don't hide behind it. You know, as long as the surgeon knows and they can actually work it into how the practice works, then I don't think it's,
Yeah.
personally, I don't think it's a massive issue, but I would say that, wouldn't I? One thing, Dr. Donju, obviously you've used this lens again 10, 11 years. There have been reported issues with hydrophilic lenses. Have you seen any of these? Obviously, we talk about classifications and things like this with our lens.
Not Jim, not with the Lenstec lenses, no. And as you say, I've used them for over 10 years. I think, yeah, I've not seen any problems. And of course, one of the sort of issues which is talked about nowadays is always this risk of the lens or a hydrophilic lens opacifying if you've got if you, example, have air in the AC or a vitrectomized eye, something like that, that there's an increased risk. But I haven't come across, personally, I haven't come across it as being a problem with the Lenstec lens. And I think again, coming that issue with PCO, we always warn our patients there is a risk that they're going to get PCO, regardless of whatever lens you're going to put in. And it's part of our package deal that we cover that for them. I think the issue again, you know, yes, all right, you might get a higher incidence of PCO with hydrophilic, but the thing is, with multifocals, that you don't have to have much PCO before the patients become aware of it. And I find that even if you're putting in a Panoptix or any other sort of premium multifocal, you're often putting them in a younger age group, sort of that presbyopic 50s, early 60s age group. And you know, they're very critical. They're already having it done because they want to see well, so they're critical, and they become aware at a very early stage when something's changed and they've got that bit of PCO. So even with a Panoptix, we'll find you tend to yag. You'll often be yagging them more earlier, should I say, than if they'd had if you were doing a monofocal Acrosoft cataract in an 80-year-old or something like that. And the other thing about yagging them is that quite often after you've yagged them, they say, wow, vision's even better, because the capsule's gone. So the optics are actually even clearer for them, you know. Mm-hmm. So I don't have a problem with yagging them. I think the risks generally of yag laser is with this situation is generally very low. So I'm quite happy to. Yeah.
Brilliant. Anybody, anything else to add on that? No. Okay, I think we're about. Go on, sorry, Prof. Did you want anything?
No.
Oh, sorry.
No.
So I think that's pretty much as finished. We've exhausted most of the questions. Some of the questions there's a couple that I'll answer privately that weren't basically quite as pertinent today, but we're hoping to hold another one of these again. We'll give it some time to digest, and we want to come up with some obviously different topics. But I'd like to thank the speakers today for giving up your time, especially on a Saturday. I know in the States it's Labor Day weekend, so nobody does anything. So thank you, Dr. Kim. And I know Dr. Donju should be at his caravan on the Weir today. And also Prof's put his flight back, supposed to be going to Mauritius. So I do appreciate all your time and input for this. It really does help. So with that, thank you to the delegates for listening. I noticed most of them have actually stopped on for the whole time, which is fantastic. We haven't bored everybody too much. Jill, do you want to close out?
Yeah, thank you to Jim and Lenstec for hosting the webinar and having the initial ideas, which were discussed at the college back in May. So it's great to have this come to fruition. Just to say to everybody that's attended, we did get 2 CPD points from the college for the UK. So there is an evaluation form that will be sent, an electronic link for you to just click on. And if you submit that, we'll get CPD certificates out to everybody next week. As Jim said, if any questions haven't been answered, please do send them by email, though I do think I've captured them all and sent them to Jim and Lenstec to make sure everything got discussed and answered. So on my behalf, thank you very much to everybody who's joined, as Jim said, and we will see you at the next Lenstec webinar. Thank you.
Cheers, everyone. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Cheers.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Bye-bye.
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 Bye.